operators and service providers stand with relation to some of these security issues that you're looking at? How deeply involved are they with the issues that you're looking at with respect to security?
Well, I would say that Cisco has been one of the leaders in this area. They have a whole trustworthy computing initiative, but they're not the only one by any means. We look at, for example, Trusted Computing Group, that standards group that I referred to earlier. We have 4 of the network equipment providers. We've got Cisco, we've got Juniper, HP, and Huawei, 4 of the largest, who are active in that group and who have been developing guidelines for how this hardware security capability can be used not just to secure the devices, but also to secure the routers, the switches, the network equipment itself, because that has an essential role to play. And certainly if you can hack the network, that's bad for IoT, reliability, confidentiality, privacy, all of that.
So can you think of the best examples in the recent past of security breaches that illustrate the perils of a lack of security, or at least the faults of state of the art of security such as it is?
There are new ones that come in every day. I just saw one yesterday which was relating to something very similar, how cameras that you can buy from Amazon, in the Amazon marketplace. These are security cameras. They're sold in a set of 6. They're designed to be used in a commercial environment or maybe a small office. Not only did they have vulnerabilities, but they were coming pre-infected from the factory with malware. So that's an egregious example, but there are lots and lots of other examples. We can look at connected cars and the Jeep Chrysler attack that happened last summer. We can look at industrial control systems, the Ukrainian power grid attack, which took place in December 2015. All of these are cases where the lack of strong security built into these IoT systems is critical. And it's not just build it into the camera, you have to build it into the network as well. So to take an example in that environment, let's take the so-called NSA catalog of attacks, what's sometimes called firmware implants. This was disclosed in Der Spiegel article of December 30th, 2013, based on some of the Snowden revelations. There is apparently a catalog of attacks that could be used by, shall we say, certain governments in order to subvert network equipment. Now, what's current technology for the government today becomes current technology for criminals a few years out. And this catalog dated from 2008. So it's a very real concern that those same attacks, those same sorts of attacks that were used to subvert and infect and compromise network equipment by governments could also become a backdoor or an opportunity for attackers to subvert the network equipment today.
So you also have some insight into the applications that are growing on IoT, which means they're from different vertical industries, which have different requirements, demands, set of standards, etc.
Yep.
So to what extent are the things that you're working on in creating a higher level of security, to what extent are they becoming differentiated based on the application? You highlighted some of the commonalities for IoT requirements and security concerns, but to what extent do they differ from one vertical industry to another?
It's a great question. So there are a lot of similarities across these different industries, especially as we look at the fundamental technologies. You don't need a different encryption algorithm just because you're securing communications to a car versus to a smartphone versus to an industrial environment. You don't need different encryption, but you may need different protocols. So for example, you might be connecting over a cellular network to the car because that's a highly mobile environment, whereas in an industrial environment you might be using a wired Ethernet and a specific set of protocols that are used in that environment. For example, the building automation systems often use MACnet. So the protocols may be different, but the same fundamental capabilities, the ones that are supported in our chips, are very common across those verticals. The place that we see differences when we look at it from a chip maker's perspective are in the levels of security and reliability that are required. So for example, the chip that's being used in a car has to be able to handle a very wide temperature range and continue to operate, way below zero, up to, very high temperatures if you leave your car shut, in a desert environment in Phoenix in the middle of the summer. It has to be able, they have to be able to hop in, turn it on, and have it operate, even when the chip is still at those high temperatures. Also vibration, it can be a concern. Long life is an issue. A consumer application might only have a 5 or 10 year lifespan for that device. But in an industrial environment or automotive, you might need 10, 20, or even 30 years lifespan. So that's another additional demand that's placed on our products in those environments.
And does that suggest that the cost structure, for instance, changes, gets higher the longer life you need out of a chipset, for instance, may pose business development or revenue forecasting and bottom line questions for the developer, for the OEMs, for instance, who may be faced with a shortfall or a gap in expectation of how much they need to invest in IoT and IoT security?
Yes. So one of the big challenges that people face when we look at IoT security over such a long period of time, 20 years or 30-year product lifetime, is to what extent are the capabilities that we design today still going to be secure 20 or 30 years out? So we have to include a little extra margin of security, something which might be perfectly acceptable today. In 20 years, with the advance of Moore's Law, for example, keys that are secure today are not going to be secure in 20 years. So you have to include that extra margin of safety and build that in. And as to your question about pricing, certainly any time that you're talking about a special, industrial grade product, whether it's semiconductors or anything else, there's certainly going to be a higher cost there. I don't think we're talking about anything too exorbitant, but your commercial grade versus your consumer grade versus your industrial grade, there are different levels of pricing because there's extra protections and extra testing that has to be done.
I think just one last question, if we may, is if there are, can you think of examples of leaders in IoT security from the application side of it, or in these industries? Can you think of some examples of best practices that may exist today?
Sure. So I would point, for example, to General Electric. General Electric has been a leader in understanding not just the IoT and the industrial IoT, but also the importance of security in that area. They've made it a very high priority, and they were one of the founders of the Industrial Internet Consortium, which is propagating these best practices and promoting these best practices through some of their documents, such as their reference architecture for the industrial internet and their soon-to-be forthcoming security framework for the industrial internet.